There are two Oxfords, the one that glitters in the brochure, all spires and sunlight, and the one you only see at 4 in the morning, a car seat for a pillow, a boiler gone cold at home. A scholarship held together with breath and luck. This is Graham's story. A young man translating Latin by day, stacking pallets by night, learning how long a secret can stand before it shakes, and how love looks when it costs you something you cannot replace. It is also Phoebe's story, born under high ceilings and old portraits, suddenly staring across a line she never knew was there, and choosing which history to keep. Between privilege and pride, between what we show and what we survive, there is an invisible line. Tonight, we walk it. We will feel the ache of it, and the grace that arrives when truth finally speaks. Settle in, breathe, let the city go quiet around you. This is The Shadow of the Spire, written by Coops, and it just might make you cry. The Shadow of the Spire. Chapter 1. The Art of the Invisible Line. Graham had 7 minutes to become a man who slept in sheets. The Bodleian Library reading room was not merely silent. It was a vacuum of expectation, a hushed testament to centuries of scholarship. The air smelled of old paper and dust motes suspended in the long, yellow beams of morning sun. This was the Oxford he had earned. He sat rigid at the oak desk, a leather-bound edition of Seneca's Letters from a Stoic propped open before him. The letters were a cruel joke. Seneca spoke of intellectual self-sufficiency and the rejection of worldly vanity. Graham's mind, however, was preoccupied with worldly, inescapable vanity. The industrial-strength soap smell clinging to the lining of his blazer, the subtle tremor in his right hand from 4 hours spent stacking pallets, and the persistent metallic chill that never quite left his bones. He glanced at the clock on the wall. 7 minutes until Phoebe. He needed those 7 minutes to erase the last residue of the night, the 9 hours spent at the G&T Logistics Warehouse off Junction 11 of the M40, followed by the 2 hours spent wiping down the stainless steel counters at the all-night service station near Kidlington. 3 jobs, barely enough hours left for the 1,200 words of Latin translation required this week, and 0 minutes to truly sleep. He didn't live in a room on Turl Street like the other classics scholars. His accommodation was a beaten-up 2005 Ford Focus, parked 3 miles out of the city limits near the entrance to a quarry, a spot quiet enough for a few hours of deeply uncomfortable rest, but close enough to cycle back before dawn. He pressed the heels of his hands hard into his eyelids, counting to 60. When he opened them, the Latin text was a blur. Phoebe. He had to focus on Phoebe. She was the one true, uncalculated luxury in his life, and the most dangerous element of his secret. She arrived with the noise of a forgotten world. She wasn't loud, but her presence, framed by the Gothic archway, drew the eye a cascade of deep auburn hair, a tweed blazer that looked expensive in a way that defied logos, and a light-filled smile. She moved through the silence not as an intrusion, but as a person utterly unburdened by consequence. "Graham, you're pale as a ghost," she murmured, slipping into the chair opposite him. Her voice, refined and slightly breathless, was full of inherited confidence. She smelled faintly of fresh-cut roses and expensive soap, a smell that felt dangerously decadent to him. "Just a late night on the Stoics," he lied easily, forcing a smile. "They demand sacrifice. You demand a proper sleep schedule," she countered, pulling a thermos from her leather satchel. "I brought you coffee. Proper coffee, not the sludge from the JCR." He watched her pour it. Her father was Lord Ashworth, owning 50,000 acres in Warwickshire and a house in Kensington. Phoebe herself was studying Renaissance art history, a field Graham genuinely loved but whose financial frivolity he found terrifying. She bought new books because she liked the cover art. He bought them because the second-hand price meant 2 fewer miles cycled that morning. "Thanks," he said, taking the mug. The warmth spread through his hands, but the bitter, metallic taste in his mouth, a byproduct of sustained exhaustion, overpowered the flavor. I'm swamped. It's that comparative essay on Roman republicanism. Phoebe sighed, pushing her textbook away. Oh, that's dull. We should take a break. A proper break. This was the part of every conversation that sent a spike of pure, cold panic through Graham. The moments where her sheer freedom intersected with his total lack of it. I have a glorious idea, she continued, leaning forward, her eyes bright with excitement. My parents are away for the bank holiday weekend. My father's got a small cottage in the Cotswolds. It's ridiculously picturesque. Thatched roof, wood burner, the works. It's usually locked up, but I found the key in the study this morning. We could drive out Friday. Just the two of us. 2 days of reading only what we want to read, walks, maybe a village pub lunch. Nobody for miles. We could actually talk. The suggestion landed like a physical blow. Drive out! The Cotswolds! 2 days! The thought of 2 consecutive nights of actual, uninterrupted sleep in a warm bed made his eyes burn with unexpected tears. But the logistics of it were impossible. An immediate, catastrophic threat to his fragile, invisible line. Drive out. His focus was not fit for a long weekend, and certainly not fit to be seen parked beside the Range Rovers of the Cotswolds. He couldn't afford the petrol. More importantly, he couldn't miss Friday night's shift security patrol, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., or Saturday's shift packing, 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. If he missed even one, the rent money he was sending back home to his mother in the Birmingham estate would be short, and that was the one price he could never pay. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, but he forced his face into an expression of controlled, thoughtful regret. He had practiced this look in the steamed-up window of his car. Phoebe, that sounds incredible, he began, leaning back to create physical space and distance from the sincerity in her eyes. Truly, but I can't. Not this weekend. Why not? She asked, genuinely disappointed, the brightness in her eyes fading slightly. It's bank holiday. No tutorials. Everyone buggers off. He scrambled, searching for a lie grand enough to discourage her but vague enough not to invite questions. He had to kill the idea completely. It's the scholarship committee, he said, lowering his voice conspiratorially, adding a false layer of academic importance. Professor Alistair Vaughan. He's putting together a small ad hoc study group for the candidates. Very intense. Very last minute. It's mandatory. He watched her face, praying the lie was airtight. He used Professor Vaughan's name, the most intimidating scholar on campus, because it sounded final. Vaughan? Phoebe frowned. But it's a holiday. That's monstrous. What's the focus? A deep dive into juvenile satires, Graham fabricated, naming the darkest, most obscure topic he could think of. Specifically, the socio-economic context of the first-century CE proletariat he wants us to present on Saturday evening. On Saturday? You won't even have a moment's rest, she said, her voice laced with genuine concern for his welfare, which paradoxically made his guilt burn hotter. Can you not just say no? It's Vaughan, Graham repeated, making the name sound like a death sentence. And my scholarship is everything, you know? I can't risk looking less than utterly committed. I need this to stick. He watched her process the lie, the necessity of academic sacrifice, the ruthlessness of his ambition. It fit the narrative of the hard-working scholar she admired. Phoebe conceded with a sigh. God, I hate that man. He's such a dinosaur. Fine, but you look like you're about to collapse. Promise me you'll try to get more than 4 hours tonight. I promise, Graham lied, gripping the coffee mug. Tonight, he knew, involved the longest drive of the week. back to Birmingham for his longest and best-paying shift at a massive food packaging plant, followed by an immediate drive back to be in Oxford by 9 a.m. Saturday morning. He wouldn't see the inside of his Ford Focus until 4 a.m. He had successfully deflected the Cotswolds trip, but the effort cost him a piece of his soul. He felt the invisible line, the boundary between the truth of his life and the lie he presented, stretching dangerously thin. He was an architect of his own deception, and every successful deflection meant the structure grew taller, wobblier, and closer to catastrophic collapse. Chapter 2. 6 hours and a half-eaten sandwich. The 9-hour Birmingham round trip, punctuated by a shift that demanded constant, high-speed movement, had liquefied Graham's fatigue into something corrosive. It wasn't just physical tiredness. It was a state of being where reality seemed to lag a half-second behind his perception. He arrived in Oxford at 9:07 a.m. on Saturday, 7 minutes late for the mandatory tutorial with Professor Alistair Vaughan. 7 minutes. In the context of Vaughan's syllabus, 7 minutes was an eternity, enough time to translate a dozen lines of Catullus, or prove oneself fundamentally unserious. Vaughan was a lean, desiccated man in his late 50s, who viewed enthusiasm with suspicion and poverty with a clinical, academic distaste. Graham found him waiting in his office, not sitting behind his desk, but standing by the window overlooking the immaculate quad, his hands clasped behind his back, as if guarding the world outside from contamination. The atmosphere was refrigerated. "Mr. Davies," Vaughan said without turning, his voice the dry rustle of parchment. "My clock is accurate. Your absence from the scheduled start time is duly noted." "Professor, I am deeply sorry. The trains—" "We are not discussing the state of the UK railway infrastructure, Mr. Davies," Vaughan interrupted, turning slowly. He fixed Graham with a look that managed to be both dismissive and penetrating. "You are here on the John Ruskin Scholarship. This institution invests considerable resources into your potential. Lateness implies a lack of respect for that investment, and worse, a failure to manage the foundational requirements of a scholarly life." Vaughan slid a formal, printed warning across the desk, a stark white page listing the missed minutes. "I don't want to see this form again, Graham. If you are struggling with the academic load, we can discuss alternatives. But I will not tolerate sloppiness from a scholarship candidate." The warning was a blade. Losing the scholarship meant not only losing Oxford, but losing the £800 monthly stipend he sent home. Graham swallowed the bile of indignation and shame, nodding stiffly. "It won't happen again, Professor, I understand." He left the office with the formal warning tucked deep into his inside pocket, a secret ulcer. The immediate, terrifying consequence of his double life was no longer just exhaustion. It was a tangible threat to his only escape route. He found Phoebe at the usual cafe near the covered market, attempting to decipher a 17th century Italian inventory list. She looked up, her expression morphing from studious concentration to immediate worry. "How was Vaughan? You look wrecked. Did he drag you through juvenile?" "It was thorough," Graham said, forcing lightness into his voice. He dropped his heavy messenger bag beside the table. He was so starved he bought the cheapest thing on the menu, a half-eaten smoked salmon sandwich left by a student who'd clearly decided it was too ordinary for their elite palate. He covertly took the plate from the discarded trolley before the waitress could clear it, then purchased a black coffee to justify his presence. He sat down, peeling back the bread to inspect his scavenged meal, only to feel his phone buzz violently in his jeans pocket. He knew before he looked. It was his mum, followed by 3 missed calls from his sister, Libby. Graham's stomach knotted. Libby never called unless it was urgent. He quickly excused himself, retreating to the narrow alleyway behind the cafe, the roar of the ventilation system muffling his voice. "Libby, what is it?" he hissed, his heart rate spiking. His sister's voice, normally sharp and energetic, was ragged and panicked. "It's the boiler, Graham. It's completely gone. Burst, like water everywhere." Mum's got Mrs. Peterson from next door helping, but the landlord said it's our responsibility to fix it immediately or we're violating the lease. It's freezing in here, Graham. The landlord. Mr. Hayes, a notorious slumlord who delighted in finding excuses to evict tenants from the estate. A new boiler would cost thousands, money Graham simply did not have. He had sent the rent for the month, and that was all. Libby, listen to me. Breathe. How much? Did you get a quote? £2,400, she whispered. Graham, Mum is crying. She thinks we're going to be out on the street by Monday. We need at least half of that as a deposit by tomorrow, or the plumber won't even look at it. The number, £2,400, felt like a joke. He had £150 left from his 3 jobs after paying the rent home. £1,200 by tomorrow was impossible. It required 4 full shifts he hadn't yet worked. I'll fix it, I promise. Just tell Mum I'm on it, he said, his voice raw. He hung up and leaned his head against the cold brick wall, closing his eyes. The weight of the world, the entirety of his family's precarious existence, rested solely on his shoulders. He felt the cold fear of the Vaughn warning fade, replaced by the white-hot terror of his mother's tears. This was the real failure. He returned to the table, forcing a practiced calmness. He reached for his messenger bag to pull out his laptop, intending to start searching for quick cash, a pawn shop, anything. As he yanked the worn canvas bag open, a folded, bright orange safety vest, the high-vis uniform from his G&T logistics shift, tumbled out and landed on the floor near Phoebe's feet. Graham froze. The flash of orange against the dark floor was an alarm siren. Before he could move, Phoebe glanced down and then, naturally, instinctively, bent to pick it up. Her hand hesitated over the thick, industrial-grade fabric, her fingers brushing the stiff, plastic employee ID card that had slipped from the vest's pocket. G&T Logistics. Warehouse Operative. L. Davies. The moment lasted an eternity. Phoebe was confused, not immediately suspicious, but her brow furrowed in genuine curiosity. She looked at the vest, then at the card, and finally up at Graham, who felt the blood drain from his face. His carefully constructed mask of academic ambition had just cracked wide open. Graham? What is this? I thought you said you were at the Bodleian all night? She asked, holding the high-vis vest loosely. He snatched the vest and ID from her hand with a speed that was far too quick, far too aggressive. He shoved it back into the bag, zipping it closed with a sound that felt deafeningly loud. That's nothing, he stammered, feeling the heat rise. The invisible line hadn't just stretched. It had developed a nasty, visible tear right in front of her eyes. In his cheeks. It's a leftover prop from a drama society thing last term. A play about the working class. It's just clutter. The lie was pathetic, clumsy, and utterly unconvincing. He knew it, and in the sudden, uneasy silence that descended over their corner of the cafe, he saw that Phoebe knew it too. Chapter 3. The Weight of the Stone Spires. He had managed to delay the landlord for a week, but he was no closer to finding the £1,200 he needed, and Monday was looming. Now he had to go to Phoebe's parents' dinner, a long-standing agreement he could not get out of. The estate was named Ashworth Court, but it felt less like a court and more like a carefully preserved slice of history that refused to acknowledge the 21st century. It sat deep within the Warwickshire countryside, a sprawling matrix of honey-colored stone and slate roofs that seemed to absorb the weak autumn sunlight. Every detail, from the gravel crunching beneath the tires of Phoebe's borrowed Land Rover to the perfectly pruned rhododendrons lining the drive, screamed permanence. Graham, sitting silently beside her, felt more temporary than ever. His own car, the Ford Focus, was currently parked a discreet half-mile away in a public lay-by, shrouded by dense, dripping hawthorn hedges. He'd told Phoebe he preferred to walk the last stretch to clear his head, a lie she'd accepted with easy affection. The truth was, he couldn't bear for his rusting machine, still faintly smelling of warehouse grime and stale coffee, to sully the Ashworth driveway. He followed Phoebe into the house, a grand, cold hall dominated by the portraits of ancestors who looked down on him with passive, yet total, judgment. He was wearing his single most versatile item of formal wear, a charcoal jacket purchased secondhand from a vintage shop, whose tailored shoulders felt now like a suit of armor that was 3 sizes too tight. Phoebe's mother, Lady Ashworth, a woman whose politeness was so layered it felt impenetrable, greeted them with a light, non-committal air. Within the hour, Graham was introduced to a rotating cast of names ending in the Honorable or Sir, all discussing topics that felt utterly fictional to him. The fluctuating price of antique porcelain, the absurdity of the latest planning application, and the proper way to handle a moorland grouse hunt. Graham stood near the fireplace, attempting to appear interested in a conversation about the logistics of moving a yacht from Corfu. His mind, however, was running a frantic calculation. £1,200 required, £150 secured, £1,050 remaining. He had tried every avenue during the drive down, selling his old textbooks online, paltry offers, applying for an emergency bank loan, rejected instantly, and calling a former colleague unavailable. Every glance at his phone was a tense, silent prayer for a miracle that didn't arrive. He caught Phoebe's eye across the drawing room. She was laughing easily, completely at home, her posture relaxed and graceful as she conversed with a young man who looked like he had been sculpted entirely from old money. She was a beautiful distraction, and the guilt that he was here, consuming their silent, effortless luxury while his family faced homelessness, was a physical weight in his chest. Dinner was served in a cavernous dining room. Graham sat between 2 people who spoke to him only in rhetorical questions about his ambition and future contributions. The conversation turned to property, specifically a throwaway mention of a rental property in London being purchased as a long-term investment for Phoebe's cousin. Honestly, the price of a boiler these days is utterly obscene. Phoebe's cousin, a man named Rupert, commented idly, spearing a piece of lamb. Father had to replace the one at the Kensington flat last month. Came to nearly £5,000. A ridiculous expense, but necessary, of course. No point skimping on infrastructure. The number £5,000 was delivered with the same casualness as noting the weather. Graham felt his carefully constructed internal dam begin to crumble. His own family faced eviction over less than half that amount, a sum that Rupert's father spent without a second thought. Graham's hands, resting stiffly on the linen tablecloth, began to tremble. He took a large, desperate gulp of water, trying to regulate the sudden, cold spike of adrenaline. The lie felt suffocating. He was dressed in a borrowed reality, dining on food that cost more than his mother's weekly grocery budget, and smiling politely while his sister texted him pleas for help. During a lull in the conversation, Phoebe turned to him, her expression soft with concern. "Graham, you haven't touched your pheasant. Are you feeling all right? You look positively feverish." "I'm fine," he forced out, the words feeling brittle. "Just the exhaustion of the Vaughan pressure, you know? The juvenile satires." He repeated the lie, and the sound of it, the hollow echo of his fabricated scholarly struggles in this palace of genuine wealth, tasted like ash. The need to escape became an overwhelming physical imperative. He had to breathe the cold, honest air outside. He had to look at the grubby, working-class truth of his own car. "Excuse me," he mumbled, pushing back his chair with a slight tremor. "I need a moment." He made his way quickly toward the French doors leading to the dark garden, trying to ignore the confused glances. As he passed a small antique desk, his phone, which he kept permanently silenced, buzzed with frantic energy. It wasn't his mother or Libby, but an unknown number. He instinctively checked it. It was a text from the landlord, Mr. Hayes, clearly sent to the entire family. Boiler must be fixed by 10 a.m. Monday. No exceptions. Failure to comply will result in immediate lease termination. Graham didn't need to read the rest. Monday morning, 48 hours, the cold weight of the stone spires, the sheer, crushing indifference of the class divide pressed down on him, and he felt a dizzying wave of nausea. He stumbled out onto the terrace, leaning heavily against the ancient, cold stone balustrade. The manicured garden swam before his eyes, and for the first time since he started this desperate game, Graham Davies felt his exhaustion finally win. His vision tunneled, and he nearly collapsed. Chapter 4. When the Facade Cracks. Phoebe found him leaning over the stone balustrade, his breath ragged, misting in the cool night air. The vast, dark garden, usually a symbol of peaceful security, felt alien and overwhelming. He wasn't crying, but his entire body was locked in a rigid, silent tremor, as if every nerve ending was vibrating with panic. The phone was still clutched in his hand, the screen glowing faintly with the terrible, final ultimatum from the landlord. "Graham, what happened?" Her voice, usually so melodic, was tight with alarm. She didn't touch him, sensing the fragile perimeter of his control. He straightened up, trying to wipe the dizziness away, but the movement only made the world tilt further. "Nothing, Phoebe. Just air. Too much rich food, perhaps. I need to go." "Go where?" She stepped closer, her expression shifting from concern to something colder, more analytical. "No, that was real, Graham. You looked like you'd been shot. You were checking your phone just before, weren't you? That's what it was." He tried to pocket the device, but she was too quick. Her hand closed over his wrist, not gently, but with a surprising, firm demand. "Stop lying. I know something is profoundly wrong. Is it Vaughn? Did he threaten your scholarship?" The proximity and her intensity broke the last fragments of his self-control. His voice, when it came out, was a raw, choked sound of pure anguish. "Worse. It's worse than that. It's my mother. It's the house." Phoebe's grip softened. Her eyes searched his face, desperately trying to reconcile the confident, erudite classicist she knew with the broken man trembling before her. "The house? In Birmingham? What about it?" He pulled away, his back to the house and the laughter drifting from the drawing room. He had nowhere left to run. The lies had run out of road. "The boiler burst," he began, the words tumbling out in a rush, messy and unedited, reflecting the chaotic state of his mind. "It's gone. It's not the landlord's fault. It's ours. Some clause about internal infrastructure. It's freezing, Phoebe. And the deposit for the plumber, £1,200, is due tomorrow. Or the landlord terminates the lease on Monday. He's been looking for an excuse for months. They'll be on the street. No hot water, no heating, nowhere to go." He dragged a hand through his hair, suddenly realizing how inadequate the story sounded, how easily a problem that was life-destroying to him could be solved by a simple signature from her father. Phoebe stared at him, not reacting to the financial panic, but to the sheer scale of the terror in his voice. "But why didn't you tell me? We could transfer the money right now. It's not nothing, but it's easily solved. You just needed to ask." That was the line. The statement, delivered with casual, effortless certainty, was what shattered the remaining facade. "Don't you dare," Graham hissed, the sudden fury born of years of suppressed shame. "Don't you dare tell me it's easily solved. That is my problem to solve. That is my life. This ridiculous lie I've been living, it's all for that £800 stipend. It's the only thing keeping them safe." He paused, gathering the air to deliver the rest of the agonizing truth. "There is no Vaughn study group, Phoebe. There are no juvenile satires this weekend. I spent last night and today working 3 different jobs just to try and scrape together half the deposit. I was stacking boxes in a warehouse until 6 a.m., and then cleaning toilets at a service station near Kidlington until 8 a.m. I wasn't late for Vaughan because of the train. I was late because I fell asleep at the wheel and had to pull over on the hard shoulder for 15 minutes just to make it back to Oxford. He saw the shock register on her face, but it was quickly replaced by a sharp, deep confusion. The puzzle pieces, the high-vis vest, the pallor, the aggressive deflection, clicked into place. 3 jobs? Graham, what are you talking about? You're on the Ruskin Scholarship that covers everything. And where do you live? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The inherited confidence completely stripped away. The final, humiliating truth. He looked toward the lay-by, half a mile away, imagining the battered Ford Focus, his only home in Oxford. I live in my car, Graham said, the words heavy and metallic. He didn't drop his gaze. The Focus. The one you've never seen. The one I park in the Quarry Road. I use the Bodleian to wash and the university toilets to shave. I live off discarded sandwiches, and I lied to you, Phoebe, about everything. About my family, about where I come from, about where my money goes, and about the fact that I'm drowning. The silence that followed was immense, heavy with the weight of her privilege and his deceit. Phoebe didn't flinch. She just looked utterly desolate, processing the depth of the betrayal. But why? She finally asked, her voice trembling, hurt replacing the confusion. Why did you lie? Did you think I would think less of you? Did you think I couldn't understand? You don't understand, Phoebe. You can't, Graham said, shaking his head bitterly. You don't have to lie about being poor to be taken seriously. You don't know what it's like to be treated like a charity case or worse, a problem to be solved with a quick, transfer the money right now. I didn't want your pity. I wanted your respect. And the only way to get it here was to pretend I was one of you. Tears finally welled in her eyes, not of pity, but of raw, personal pain. And what about me, Graham? Did you respect me? I thought we were building something real. Every kiss, every walk, every late-night conversation, was it all a performance? Was it a joke to you? No, never you, Phoebe. Never, he pleaded, stepping toward her, his own tears finally coming. You were the only true part of it, the only part I never lied about. But the closer we got, the more terrifying it became. This world, your world, it was suffocating the real me. It was too much to ask of you to cross that line and love the person in the high-vis vest. He pulled his hand from his pocket, revealing the crumpled eviction notice. It's over now anyway. I have to go. I have to drive to Birmingham and find a cash machine or a loan shark or something. I have to be there by morning. I can't let them down. Phoebe stood frozen, the shock giving way to a devastating realization of the extent of his sacrifice. Wait. If you leave now, you'll drive exhausted and you have no money. That's insane, Graham. You'll kill yourself. I've already killed the man you thought you loved, he said, his voice flat with self-loathing. He turned and walked away from the light of Ashworth Court, not toward his miserable car in the lay-by, but simply running into the absolute darkness of the garden, leaving Phoebe standing alone, finally understanding the true, crushing weight of the invisible line that separated their lives. Chapter 5. The Gift of the Sacrifice. The darkness of Ashworth Court swallowed Graham whole. Phoebe remained on the terrace. The remnants of the evening, the smell of pheasant and polished mahogany, the distant tinkle of polite conversation, a cruel, mocking contrast to the raw, visceral terror that Graham had left hanging in the air. You don't understand, Phoebe. You can't. His words were a continuous, grinding echo. He was right. To her, £1,200 was an inconvenience. To him, it was the difference between security and homelessness. He didn't want a handout. He didn't want her father's pity money, which would only reinforce the chasm between them. He wanted respect, and he wanted a partner who understood what it meant to struggle, to sacrifice. She walked back inside, past the silent portraits, her mind working with frantic clarity. She ignored the confused inquiries about Graham's abrupt departure, simply muttering that he'd received an urgent call about his scholarship and had to return to Oxford immediately. Her mother's polite, distant sympathy made Phoebe feel sick. They had all been playing the same game as Graham, pretending their world was the only world. She went straight to her room, a space she'd occupied since childhood, filled with artifacts of effortless privilege. Her eyes fell immediately on the antique mahogany dresser and inside the small velvet-lined jewelry box. Nestled there was the emerald and diamond pendant, her great-grandmother's, given to her on her 21st birthday. It wasn't the most expensive piece, but it was the most sentimental, a genuine piece of Ashworth history, a tangible symbol of her birthright. She thought of Graham's high-vis vest, the uniform of his invisible shame. She thought of him sleeping in a cold car. The shame he felt over money could not be healed by money that cost her nothing. It had to cost her something real. The pendant was worth enough to cover the deposit, and crucially, she could sell it without anyone knowing until Monday morning. It was her own history, her own piece of the spire she was offering up for sacrifice. Within half an hour, she was back in the Land Rover, a small, discreet bag containing the necklace resting on the passenger seat. She didn't head back to Oxford. She drove east, toward Coventry, the nearest city large enough to have a discreet, late-night cash buyer. The transaction, carried out in a backstreet jeweler's shop tucked beside a closed pub, was clinical and fast. The man behind the counter, wary but professional, weighed the pendant, made a quick call, and presented her with a stack of used, banded notes. He counted out £1,350, a little more than the deposit required. Phoebe felt the weight of the cash, real, unlaundered, earned cash and the emptiness around her neck, and the exchange felt sickeningly profound. This money was blood money, cut from her own history. With the money secured, she started the long, desperate drive to Birmingham, Graham's hometown. She drove through the black, anonymous motorways of the Midlands, the Land Rover cutting through the fog of a freezing Saturday night. The urgency of the 10 a.m. Monday deadline was a physical pressure in her temples. She knew Graham would have arrived in Birmingham hours ago, utterly defeated, facing his family's crisis with empty hands. She had to find him. She pulled off the motorway and navigated through the labyrinthine housing estates of Birmingham. Graham's directions, given to her weeks ago as an offhand dismissal of his past, were now the only map she had. The streets were narrow, the terraced houses densely packed, and the atmosphere felt heavy with the cold reality of life lived close to the bone. She spotted the Ford Focus first, parked carelessly half on the pavement, looking small, rusty, and intensely lonely. Graham wasn't inside. She parked the Land Rover a few streets away, suddenly self-conscious of the immense, gleaming size of her inherited vehicle. She couldn't arrive like a rescue operation. She had to arrive as an equal. She walked the rest of the way, holding the cash bundle tight in her coat pocket. The house was cold and dimly lit. She could hear raised, distressed voices before she even reached the front door. It wasn't Graham's family fighting. It was them arguing with a third party. Through the window, Phoebe saw the silhouette of a heavy-set man in a thick coat, Mr. Hayes, the landlord gesturing aggressively. Graham's mother, a tired, stoic-looking woman, was holding a tissue to her eyes, while Libby, pale and furious, stood defensively between her mother and the door. Graham was there, too, slumped on the stairs, his head in his hands, clearly having failed to secure the money. Phoebe walked up the cracked, uneven path. As she reached the threshold, she heard Mr. Hayes's harsh, final words, delivered with spiteful satisfaction. "I don't care about your circumstances, Mrs. Davies. The contract is clear. 10 a.m. Monday, And you're out. You've had your chance. He made to slam the door shut, locking them out of his sight. Phoebe pushed the door open before he could, stepping into the freezing, emotionally charged hallway. Her sudden presence, a perfectly dressed, beautiful stranger, froze everyone in place. Mr. Hayes blinked at her, confused by the expensive coat and the determined look on her face. Graham looked up from the stairs, his eyes wide with horror and raw, unadulterated devastation. "Who the hell are you?" Mr. Hayes demanded, his temper instantly shifting its focus. Phoebe ignored him. She looked straight at Graham, meeting his anguished gaze with fierce, uncompromising love. She walked past the landlord and knelt by the stairs, taking the thick bundle of cash from her pocket. "This is the deposit," she said, not to Graham, but to his mother, putting the money gently into the older woman's trembling hand. "It's £1,200. I sold my great-grandmother's pendant for it, and I am paying it because I love your son, and this money cost me something real." Graham's mother stared at the cash, then at Phoebe, then back at the cash, her face crumbling in bewildered relief. Graham, witnessing the complete and brutal exposure of his shame, yet seeing the devastating sincerity of her sacrifice, felt the last of his strength leave him. He finally, completely, broke. He let out a single, guttural sound of pain and relief, not bothering to wipe the tears that instantly streamed down his face. He had run from her help, and she had sacrificed a part of herself to save his family anyway. He pulled her into a shaking, desperate embrace, clinging to the only solid thing left in his shattered world. Chapter 6. The Long Road Home. The silence that followed Phoebe's declaration was deeper and more profound than the cacophony of their prior arguments. The heavy-set landlord, Mr. Hayes, stood frozen, momentarily stunned by the intervention of a woman who clearly operated on a different financial plane than his rental disputes. "This is irregular," Mr. Hayes finally spat, his voice regaining its harsh edge, but lacking conviction. He stared at the cash in Mrs. Davies's hand. "The deposit must be formally processed, not handed over in banknotes." Mrs. Davies, however, had found a new spine. She had the money, and she had the fierce, unexpected protection of Phoebe. "The plumber will be here first thing Monday morning to assess the damage," she said, her voice surprisingly firm, though tears still tracked paths down her face. "You have the money. We expect a receipt. Now please leave our home." Mr. Hayes, recognizing a battle he couldn't win, especially against someone who looked like they knew a barrister, shrugged, delivered a final, vague threat about impending paperwork, and shuffled out into the cold. The front door clicked shut, sealing the three members of the Davies family and their sudden, bewildering savior inside. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and suppressed anxiety. Libby was the first to move, pulling Phoebe into a tight, surprised hug. "Thank you," Libby whispered fiercely, genuine gratitude radiating from her. "I don't know what you are or who you are, but thank you." Phoebe managed a tired, watery smile, returning the embrace. Graham remained kneeling, his body heaving with silent, exhausted sobs. It wasn't just the relief of the money. It was the final, total surrender of his pride, watching his family witness the ultimate failure of his carefully constructed independence. "Graham, come on, lad," Mrs. Davies said softly, helping him to his feet. She didn't scold or question. She led him through the dim hallway and into the small, cold kitchen, the heart of the home. The cash remained on the counter, a silent monument to the evening's dramatic exchange. Phoebe stayed in the hallway with Libby, giving mother and son the space they desperately needed. In the kitchen, Graham slumped onto a chair, burying his head in his hands again. His mother put a chipped mug of tea, heavily sweetened, in front of him. "I'm so sorry, Mum," he mumbled into his palms. "I'm so sorry you had to see that, and sorry she had to be here." Don't you dare be sorry for that girl, Graham, his mother insisted, sitting opposite him. Her eyes, red-rimmed but steady, held a deep, complicated sorrow. That girl loves you, and she saw what you've been doing for us. She picked up the crumpled eviction notice he'd dropped. I knew you were working hard. I knew the money was tight. But I didn't know how bad it was, son. I didn't know you were sleeping in that car. He looked up, meeting her gaze, seeing the profound sadness of a mother realizing her child has been quietly suffering a terrible burden. There was nowhere else, Mum. Rent in Oxford is ridiculous. And the scholarship, the money had to come here. It was the only way I could study and keep you all safe at the same time. You shouldn't have had to choose, she whispered, her voice cracking. You shouldn't have to live in a car for us. You need to look after yourself, Graham. What good are you to us, or to that big university, if you burn out like this? It was the first time she hadn't celebrated his achievement or placed the full weight of their hope on his shoulders. She was seeing the man, not the scholar. It was a liberation, devastating and necessary. They sat in silence for a long time, the quiet weight of shared sacrifice finally binding them. You're going straight back, son, Mrs. Davies finally decided, pushing the tea closer. And you're sleeping in a proper bed tonight. That nice girl, Phoebe, she's taking you in her big car. You go with her, and you rest. You tell her the truth now, all of it. Don't you ever lie to her again. Graham nodded, too exhausted to argue. He didn't trust himself to drive his own car the 4 hours back, not after the exhaustion that had nearly broken him on the motorway that morning. He found Phoebe and Libby huddled in the hallway, sharing a low-voiced, intense conversation. Libby looked up. She's a keeper, Graham, Libby said, her tone uncharacteristically serious. She sold family diamonds for us. Don't mess this up. Outside, the Land Rover was a beacon of wealth against the gray terraces. The air inside the car, once they were moving, was charged with unspoken emotion. They were too spent for hostility or accusations. The initial torrent of truth had exhausted them both, leaving only the quiet, rhythmic hum of the engine and the hiss of the motorway. For the first hour, the silence was absolute. Then, crossing the boundary into Oxfordshire, Phoebe spoke, her voice flat and drained. The pendant, she began, staring straight ahead at the sodium lights blurring past. It was the first thing that made me feel like I belonged. It was proof of lineage. I never loved it, but it was my story. Selling it, it's like cutting off a limb, but it's the first thing in my life that's ever felt real. It cost me something, Graham. Now I know what that feels like. Graham listened, his heart aching with a tenderness that defied the wreckage of the last 24 hours. I know, he said simply. I'll get it back for you. When I graduate, I'll buy you a better one. Don't, she said, shaking her head. Don't say that. It's not about buying it back. It's about the fact that it's gone. It's the price of your secret. And now it's our secret, too. She pulled off the motorway and drove them through the dimly lit streets of Oxford. She didn't take him to his car park. She drove him straight to a beautifully maintained, small townhouse near Christ Church, her actual flat, another part of her world he had never been allowed to see. It was small for her, but palatial to him, warm, quiet, and safe. You're not sleeping in the Focus tonight, Graham, she said, switching off the engine. You're sleeping here, in a bed. We'll talk tomorrow. We'll figure out how to be honest people together. He was too tired to resist. He walked into the apartment. The smell of expensive linen and old books, a dizzying change from stale coffee and diesel fumes. He stood in the warm, immaculate living room, feeling like a ghost. Phoebe walked toward him, not as his girlfriend, not as his savior, but as an exhausted comrade. She reached out and took his hand, the contact soft but immensely grounding. Welcome home, Graham, she whispered, her voice heavy with the promise of a very uncertain future. Chapter 7. The Spire and the Sanctuary. The morning was crisp and brilliantly cold, the kind of weather that made Oxford's stone spires look impossibly sharp against the pale sky. Graham woke in a real bed, in a room that smelled of jasmine and clean linen, not exhaust and damp canvas. He was utterly, bone-deep rested for the first time in months. The crisis was over, but the reckoning was due. He had two immediate tasks: secure the family's future with the plumber's deposit and face Professor Vaughn. Phoebe had already handled the first, contacting Mrs. Davies with a plan to pay the plumber directly on Monday morning via bank transfer, ensuring the money was used correctly. She had managed the transaction with a ruthless, upper-class efficiency that was surprisingly comforting. Now, he faced the greater fear, the judgment of the academic world he had risked everything to enter. He walked into Vaughn's office at his corrected time of 9 a.m. sharp, carrying neither the false composure of the previous day nor a prepared excuse. He placed the crumpled formal warning from Saturday on the professor's mahogany desk, its polished surface reflecting the cold morning light. "Professor," Graham said, his voice level and steady, free of stammering for the first time in weeks. "I am not here to offer an apology for my lateness, as apologies are meaningless without a change in behavior. I am here to offer a full explanation of my conduct and to tender my resignation from the John Ruskin Scholarship if you deem it necessary." Graham told him everything. He spoke of the 3 jobs: the logistics warehouse, the car park, the Birmingham flat, the boiler, and the eviction notice. He spoke of his mother's pride and the suffocating pressure of being their only hope. He ended with the raw, brutal truth of his shame, his lying, and Phoebe's sacrifice of her family history to save his. Vaughn listened, silent and utterly still, the expression on his face unreadable. When Graham finally finished, the only sound was the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the corridor outside. "You understand, Mr. Davies," Vaughn finally said, his voice low and measured, "that the terms of the scholarship explicitly forbid outside employment that interferes with the primary pursuit of your studies." "I do, sir. I interfered with them entirely." Vaughn stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the perfect, impossible towers of Oxford. "I have known students who have lost this place due to laziness, due to arrogance, and due to the moral decay that often follows too much easy wealth. Never have I seen a student jeopardize his career through a selfless commitment to his family." He turned back, folding his hands precisely. "You used your education as a shield for your family. That is, perhaps, a noble distortion of the process. The university is not interested in your class, Mr. Davies, but in your mind. The fact that you performed your duties passing your exams with merit while simultaneously conducting a secret double life and sleeping in a car suggests a tenacity that few of your peers possess." Vaughn walked back to the desk, picked up the warning slip, and tore it neatly in half. "The scholarship is not revoked, Graham, but it is on immediate, strict probation. You will cease all employment at G&T Logistics immediately. You will provide a permanent, official address in Oxford, one with heat, and you will attend mandatory welfare meetings twice a week. I will not have my scholarship candidate freezing in a focus. If I see one more tardiness, one more slip in your academic performance, I will personally sign the paperwork ending your career here." He paused, then added, almost an afterthought, a flicker of something human in his eyes, "Now go, and tell Miss Ashworth that true wealth is not inherited, but demonstrated by action. She demonstrated it perfectly." Graham left Vaughn's office, not feeling triumphant, but cleansed. The shadow of the spire had not crushed him. It had recognized him. He returned to Phoebe's flat. The small townhouse felt like a true sanctuary, now a neutral ground, removed from the opulent history of Ashworth Court and the grinding struggle of the Birmingham estate. He found Phoebe in the living room, sitting on the plush rug, surrounded by stacks of books that she had retrieved from his miserable car boot. She looked up, and the first smile she gave him was not the easy, beautiful smile of the privileged girl he had first known, but a hard-earned expression of mutual relief. The spire didn't fall, he told her, sitting down beside her. He recounted the conversation, omitting none of the severity of the probation. Phoebe nodded, reaching for a small, leather-bound volume. Good. We need you here. I can't bear the idea of what you've been doing. She opened the book, revealing not a university text, but a blank page. She had been sketching. On the page was a small, intricate drawing of the emerald and diamond pendant. I was going to give it to you, he said, his voice thick. When I graduated, a real gift. It was never about the thing, Graham, she insisted, closing the book. It was about the history, the attachment. And now that history is closed. It paid for your family's safety. It's part of your story now, part of our story. We don't buy it back. We build a new history. Graham looked at her, truly seeing the woman who had stripped herself of a precious heirloom to bridge a gap he had failed to cross with his own hands. She had traded a symbol of inherited wealth for a symbol of sacrificial love. They sat for a long time, the afternoon sun slanting through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the warm air. Graham opened his laptop, not to frantic job listings, but to his juvenile satires notes. He finally registered Phoebe's flat as his official university address. Phoebe leaned her head against his shoulder, pointing to a highlighted line of Latin. What does this one mean again? The one about the crowd's applause? Graham translated, his voice low and peaceful. It means the applause of the crowd doesn't matter if you don't have peace at home. He closed the laptop, turning to look at the woman who had brought his home in all its complicated, messy truth, right here to Oxford. He took her hand, the touch feeling solid and real, and together they looked out the window at the distant, silent stone spires, no longer symbols of cold ambition and crushing expectation, but simply monuments on the horizon of the sanctuary they had finally, painfully, built together. If this story found you tonight, if it stayed in your chest for a moment longer than you expected, please take a second before you go. Tap the bell, give it a thumbs up, and subscribe for more stories like this one. You've been listening to The Shadow of the Spire, written by Coops, a story about love that crossed the invisible line between pride and grace and found something real in the middle. Because not every romance is made of candlelight and perfection. Some are built from cold nights, quiet courage, and the small, impossible kindnesses that change everything. Thank you for listening, for feeling, for being here. And if your heart still aches a little, that means the story did its job. You're on the romance playlist, where love is never simple, but it's always worth it.